Have you ever wondered why a man only begins to grasp a woman's worth when she's already walked away, when her silence becomes louder than her love and her absence haunts the very space where her loyalty once lived? It's because the masculine psyche often confuses possession with presence, and by the time he understands the depth of what he lost, it's no longer his to repair. At first he doesn't notice. She still answers, she still stays. She still softens, but something beneath her eyes begins to close, like the petals of a flower retreating from a storm that never ends. A woman does not leave all at once. She unravels in silence, and when she finally stops trying, it's never out of malice. It's the culmination of too many moments where she betrayed herself just to be enough for someone who never saw her. Carl Jung believed that the feminine soul is deeply intuitive, reflective, and painfully aware of shadow. A woman in her truth sees not just what a man says, but what his soul withholds. And when her spirit begins to ache under the weight of his projections, his need for her to mirror back his ego, to nurture his unhealed mother wounds, to play muse while silencing her own rage, she starts to awaken. Quietly, uneasily, and then irrevocably. She begins to hear herself. He doesn't notice this awakening, not yet, because to him, love was measured in proximity, not presence. She was still there after all, still cleaning the messes, still forgiving the distance, still believing in the potential of a man more than the reality of who he was, still soothing his storms while hers raged quietly behind her ribs. But the unconscious cannot stay buried forever. The anima, the feminine within the male unconscious, begins to stir when the external woman detaches. When the real woman he took for granted stops mirroring his value, he must face what he projected onto her. He goddess, the caretaker, the good girl, the one who loved him through every wound, every cold silence, every tantrum of his arrested boyhood. She's gone now, and with her departure, the illusion begins to crumble. He realizes it in the small things first. No more texts he didn't deserve, no more explanations for his silences, no more desperate apologies for feelings she had every right to express. He checks his phone and it's still. He walks into his home and it's quiet, not the comforting quiet of love's presence, but the hollow silence of meaning lost. It hits him not like thunder, but like a slow, suffocating fog. And he begins to spiral. Not because he misses her warmth, but because he must now confront the coldness within himself that pushed her away. You see, when a woman truly leaves, she doesn't just exit the room, she withdraws her soul, her energy, her belief in the future he once carelessly held. And that energy, that sacred presence, was the very thing that gave him life without him even knowing it. Jung called it the numinous, the divine spark that brings the soul to awareness. And when she leaves, that spark dims, not just in the home, not just in his days, but in the very core of his being. But this is her liberation. This is the moment she no longer shapes herself around the hollow outline of a man's ego. She no longer tries to be palatable, no longer keeps her voice at a whisper, no longer abandons her boundaries to keep the illusion of connection alive. She reclaims her time, her space, her body, and most importantly, her gaze. Because the most dangerous thing a woman can do is look away, not in anger, not in resentment, but in indifference. The absence of longing is what breaks him, not the tears, not the yelling, not the goodbyes. It's when she no longer needs him to understand. That is when he finally does. But it's too late, because she is not the same woman who begged him to meet her halfway. That version of her was sacrificed at the altar of his comfort. She's grown, she's learned, she's burned, and she has risen from the ashes of her former self. Softer, yes, but sharper, no longer seeking a savior, no longer searching for recognition in the mirror of someone else's eyes. The mirror has shattered, and in its place, she sees herself. He will remember the warmth, the small moments, the grace he never earned. He will remember the way she stood by him in silence, long after she should have walked away. And he will ache, not for her body, not for her presence, but for the version of himself he only felt in her light. But that light is no longer his to bask in. He tries to replace her, at first quickly, with distractions, with noise, with other women who laugh too easily, who touch without depth, who echo back to him the illusion that he is whole. But they are not her, because they don't challenge the shadows in him, they don't stir the old ache, they don't hold the mirror that she once did, the one that didn't flatter but revealed. A man doesn't mourn a woman's body, he mourns the version of himself he could have become if he had risen to the height of her love. You see, she was never asking him to be perfect, she was asking him to see, to feel, to show up from a place deeper than convenience, ego, or entitlement. But he thought he had time. He thought love was a game of endurance, not depth. And when she finally left, he assumed she would return, because she always did, until she didn't. This is where the anima bites back. When she detaches, she no longer feeds his spirit unconsciously, and without that he begins to starve, emotionally, spiritually, psychically. Jung understood this. The feminine within a man cannot evolve if it is constantly outsourced to a real woman. When that woman leaves, the masculine is forced to confront his own soul, not the fantasy of a woman, but the raw feminine within himself. And most men are terrified of that meeting, because the anima is wild. She is rage and grace. She is intuition and sorrow. She is birth and destruction. She is not the domesticated version he projected onto the woman he lost. She is the part of him that feels deeply, that bleeds in silence, that craves meaning over validation. And without her integration, he remains a fractured man, lost in performance, addicted to control, unable to descend into his own depths. But she, the real woman, has already done this descent. She has walked through the underworld of unworthiness. She has stood in the mirror of his indifference and chosen to see herself anyway. She has cried tears he will never witness and carried grief he will never understand. Not because she was weak, but because she stayed long after her soul whispered, "Go." That staying wasn't foolishness, it was devotion. It was the last flicker of hope that love could transform him. And when it didn't, she transformed herself. You might think she walked away because she stopped loving him, but that isn't true. She walked away because she started loving herself. Because the version of her that once needed his approval no longer exists. Because healing made her too full to beg for crumbs. Because peace began to feel more seductive than chaos. And in choosing herself, she didn't just leave. She closed the door to her past self, who once tolerated less than she deserved. For the man left behind, this isn't just heartbreak, this is ego death. This is the collapse of the fantasy that he could offer the bare minimum and still be worshipped. This is where the real work begins, if he is willing, if he can brave the loneliness long enough to stop blaming and start reflecting, to sit with the pain without numbing it, to face the boy within him who never learned how to receive love without control. But many men won't. They will repeat the pattern. Project the wound, chase women who let them stay shallow, until one day they look in the mirror and realize they've never been truly seen, not even by themselves. And for her, there is no bitterness, only clarity. She walks not with vengeance, but with wisdom. She no longer needs to prove her value to someone who couldn't recognize it. Her silence isn't a punishment, it's a boundary. Her absence isn't emptiness, it's sacred space, and her detachment isn't cold, it's the heat of self-possession, the flame that now warms her from within, not the fire she once burned trying to keep others comfortable. So when he realizes she's not coming back, it isn't just her he mourns, it's the version of himself that could have been, had he loved her better, had he loved himself more, had he listened, had he seen. But that version of him died the same day she stopped trying to be heard. And in the ruins of what was, only one truth remains. You don't lose a woman like her, you lose yourself when she leaves. Now begins the reckoning, not just of heartbreak, but of identity. The man who once believed she was always going to be there is left standing in the echo of his own emotional poverty. Not because he lacked wealth or power or charm, but because he never dared to go where real intimacy lives, into vulnerability, into accountability, into the terrifying mirror of his own emotional neglect. Her love had offered him that mirror, not to break him, but to awaken him. But he turned away. He mistook discomfort for threat. He mistook her intensity for instability. He mistook her silence for compliance. And now she is gone. He replays the moments, the eye contact he ignored, the night she asked for presents and he gave performance, the time she offered her truth only to be met with dismissal. He begins to see that it wasn't that she needed too much. It was that he gave too little. Not of gestures, not of gifts, but of soul. Carl Jung wrote that the unconscious becomes our fate when we refuse to make it conscious. This is his fate now, not punishment, but prophecy, the prophecy that every man must face when he has mistaken a woman's loyalty for her limits, when he has confused her softness with submission, her patience with permission, her forgiveness with forgetfulness, because she never forgot. She remembered everything. The way he looked away when she cried, the way he criticized her when she was most vulnerable, the way he demanded understanding while offering none. She carried these memories not as weapons but as wounds, until they no longer hurt but hardened into boundaries, hardened into truth. You see, the feminine does not forget. She remembers in her bones, in her belly, in her breath. And when she finally walks, it's not because she is broken. It's because she is done betraying herself in the name of staying. She walks because the voice within her has grown louder than the promises he never kept. And still, he believes, in the beginning, that this is just another phase, that she will return, that this is a test, and if he waits long enough she'll come back, maybe even apologetic, like before. He underestimates her evolution. He assumes her silence is a tactic, not a truth. But this time is different. This time, her silence is sacred. It is not silence waiting to be filled. It is silence born of clarity. It is no longer an invitation. It is closure. And if he dares to pierce it, to reach into that silence again, he will find not her waiting, but himself, alone with the echo of his avoidance. What he failed to realize was that love is not maintained by desire alone. It requires presence, devotion, growth. To love a woman who knows her soul is to be willing to meet your own. And he didn't. He expected her to keep burning even while he offered no fuel. But even the brightest flame dies in the absence of oxygen. And she has become her own oxygen now. She breathes without him. She laughs without apology. She dances, not for someone to watch, but because the music inside her no longer depends on being witnessed. She has rewritten the script, no longer the woman who waits, no longer the woman who pleads, no longer the woman who performs. Femininity for male comfort. She is wild now, but not chaotic. She is untamed, but deeply rooted. She is soft, but never small again. And somewhere in his dreams she visits. Not as punishment, but as memory, a scent, a sound, a name he wants to say, but knows he shouldn't. She is everywhere and nowhere, not because she haunts him, but because his soul recognizes what it ignored for too long. She is not his ghost, she is his lesson. He may change in time, he may grow, he may do the shadow work, face the boy within, heal the wounds he tried to hide behind arrogance. And maybe one day he will be ready for the kind of woman she was, but she won't be there anymore, because by the time he becomes ready, she will be elsewhere, in a life that matches her evolution, not his apology, and still he'll look for her. Not in places, but in women who almost feel like her, and none of them will be her. There will come a day when he sits alone in the quiet he once craved. No noise, no distractions, no laughter from a woman spinning joy out of thin air just to make the room feel alive. The silence will be heavy, not peaceful, penitent. It will press against his chest like the weight of everything he didn't say, everything he failed to feel. And in that silence, something ancient will rise within him. Regret. Not just for the woman he lost, but for the man he refused to become while she loved him. Regret is not sorrow for the past. It is recognition of the self one abandoned along the way. And that man, the one who could have loved her fully, who could have held her pain without judgment, who could have stood in her fire without retreating, that man is now a ghost inside him, and he will feel it, the haunting of who he could have been. Because she wasn't just a woman, she was a mirror. She saw him not just as he was, but as he could be, raw, honest, unguarded, whole. But instead of stepping into that truth, he recoiled. He mistook her challenge for criticism, her passion for chaos, her expectations for demands. He feared the parts of himself she saw, the tender, the fractured, the unfinished, because he hadn't yet found the courage to hold them himself. But she had. She had done the work. She had learned to sit with her own ache, to mother her own inner child, to alchemize shame into sovereignty, and that is what made her dangerous, not in cruelty, but in clarity. She knew what love was, and more importantly, she knew what it was not. And when she saw the absence of love masked as comfort, or control masked as masculinity, she could no longer deny the truth. He didn't choose her, not truly. He chose her presence, her beauty, her loyalty, but he didn't choose her depth. He didn't choose to grow with her, bleed with her, stand beside her in the furnace of intimacy. He chose the version of her that didn't challenge his stagnancy, and when she evolved beyond that, he blamed her for becoming too much. But the truth is, she outgrew the cage he mistook for safety. And that realization, that the woman he lost leveled up, is what will sting the most. Because he will see her, someday, radiant in her solitude, or beside a man who sees her the way he never did. A man who doesn't flinch in the presence of her power. A man who meets her in silence and in storm. A man who doesn't just adore her light, but bows before her shadow. And in that moment, he'll understand. She was never asking for more than what she gave. She just asked him to meet her there, in the place where love is real and terrifying and raw. But he stayed shallow, not because he didn't care, but because he didn't dare. And now, you, if you've ever been her, you must hear this. You were never too much, you were never too needy, you were never wrong for asking to be seen, held, chosen. You were not foolish for staying, you were faithful, you were not weak for crying, you were alive, you were not broken for leaving, you were becoming. Every unanswered text, every hollow "I love you," every time you bit your tongue to keep the peace, every apology you gave just to avoid abandonment, it was all a lesson. A map, a burning away of everything that once told you love had to hurt to be real. But now you know better. Now you love from overflow, not emptiness. Now you speak without shame. Now you choose not the man who begs, but the one who builds, alongside you, within himself, through truth and through fire. You are not here to rescue. You are not here to be someone's emotional crutch. You are here to rise, and to rise alone if that is what sovereignty demands. So when he realizes you're not coming back, do not flinch, do not turn, do not ache for the echo of his awakening, because your silence has already said everything your voice once begged him to hear. And now you are no longer the woman who waits to be chosen. You are the woman who chooses, who looks within before looking out, who listens to the soft ache of her body before the loud opinion of the world, who knows the sacred value of her time, her touch, her gaze, and guards them not with fear, but with reverence. Because you've seen what happens when you offer your soul to someone who only wants your warmth. You've felt the hollow of loving a man who doesn't meet you, only mirrors himself back in your devotion. You've learned that no matter how much you give, you cannot convince someone to become whole. That is not your task, that is not your burden, that is not your birthright. The woman who rises after abandonment does not come back the same. She is no longer interested in proving her softness because she knows it is not weakness. She no longer dilutes her truth to make others comfortable because she has tasted the poison of silence. She no longer stays where her intuition whispers go because she has finally understood. Her body remembers what her heart tries to forget, and still, he will remember. Years later, in the arms of a woman who doesn't know how to speak her soul, he will search for the poetry she once spoke. In the calm after an argument, he'll crave the way she used to offer peace without punishment. He'll hear a song, smell a scent, pass by a place, and she'll rise in him like a ghost with unfinished lessons, not to haunt, but to teach, because the soul remembers its turning points, and she was one. But by then, she will not be thinking of him. She will be in a new world, a world of her own making, perhaps with someone new, perhaps in solitude, but either way, at peace. Not because she forgot, but because she forgave. Not to absolve him, but to release herself. Because healing is not staying angry. Healing is remembering without pain. It's seeing clearly and choosing to walk anyway. You may wonder, does he ever truly understand? Yes, but understanding comes at a cost. When a man finally realizes the depth of what he lost, a woman who loved him through his numbness, who saw his potential even as he hid behind fear, he must confront the ways he failed her. The missed moments, the careless words, the love he withheld because he didn't yet know how to give it. And that confrontation is not a cinematic redemption. It's a quiet, aching humility. It happens in the dark, in bed at night, in the car alone, in a deep breath when no one is watching. That's when the truth comes. She is not coming back, and not because she doesn't care, but because she cares about herself now. She has stepped out of the maze of proving her worth to men who couldn't meet her. She no longer entertains the boy in a man's body who wants her love but fears her truth. She now speaks the language of the initiated, those who have walked through betrayal, abandonment, dismissal, and emerged sovereign, whole, radiant, unapologetic. And this sovereignty is not loud, it is not vengeful, it is still. A stillness that says, I am no longer available for anything that costs me my voice. A stillness that doesn't wait for closure, because she gave it to herself. A stillness that no longer explains, defends, or begs. This is the woman he lost, not the girl who needed his validation, not the caretaker who softened all his rough edges, but the woman who could have stood beside him, if only he had stood beside himself first, and now he knows, or he begins to. Love isn't something you hold on to, it's something you rise to meet, and when you don't, when you ask love to stay while refusing to grow, it leaves, quietly, completely, and it never returns the same. Because the woman who walked away was one version of her, but the woman who never came back. She is a force now, she is a storm you do not outrun, she is the calm after you've faced your own destruction and realized she was never yours to lose. She was only ever yours to honor. There is a moment, after all the stories have ended, after all the texts have been deleted, after the noise has faded, where the soul becomes still, not out of despair, but out of truth. This is the moment she stands alone and does not feel lonely, the moment she is no longer seeking reflection in someone else's eyes, but sees herself clearly for the first time, not as someone's almost, not as someone's maybe someday, but as enough, here and now. It took time, pain, silence. It took losing parts of herself just to keep someone else comfortable. But now she no longer performs. She no longer betrays herself to be chosen. She no longer measures her worth through the prism of someone else's recognition. She simply is. And in that being, she becomes untouchable. Not invulnerable, but undisturbed. Because the war within her is over. The battle between staying and leaving, between shrinking and rising, between needing and knowing, she has buried the version of herself that was addicted to proving her worth, to earning love, to waiting for crumbs. That girl was brave, that girl loved hard, that girl endured more than she should have, but that girl has transformed, and the woman who now walks the earth in her place is sovereign. She speaks little but listens deeply, not to the noise of others, but to the call of her own intuition. She no longer runs toward affection that feels like an audition. She no longer chases apologies that were never sincere. She no longer tries to fix people who benefit from her brokenness. Because she has learned, you do not heal by trying to be lovable. You heal by loving yourself exactly where you shattered. Carl Jung wrote that the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. And she has claimed that privilege with both hands, not because someone gave her permission, but because she revoked the permission she once gave others to define her. And now, she loves differently. She loves from a place of overflow, not emptiness. She gives because she wants to, not because she's afraid to lose someone. She walks away when respect is absent. She stays only where her truth is safe. And when a man meets her now, he does not meet the girl who needs validation. He meets the woman who became whole in her own silence. He must come correct, or not at all. And as for the man she left behind, the one who only realized her worth when her absence burned holes through his certainty, he will carry that wound forever. Not because she wishes him pain, but because he finally met his own mirror, not her, but himself, unsoftened by her love, unshielded by her grace. That is what remains when a woman like her leaves, not just a gap in the bed or a name in the phone, but the loss of a home, a sanctuary he didn't even know he had until it was gone. And now she is elsewhere, not lost, not hiding, but thriving in the spaces where her voice is not just heard, but honored. She is writing her new story in the ink of self-respect. Her life is no longer a reaction to abandonment, but a celebration of return, the return to herself. There are no revenge plots, no vindictive glance, no triumphant announcements, just the quiet dignity of someone who remembered who she was after forgetting for too long. And that is the most powerful kind of transformation, the kind that doesn't need to be seen to be real. So when he thinks of her then, and he will, he may still wonder if she thinks of him.